be on in a few seconds.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to the Six Sigma seminar series here at the Asian Institute of Technology. And welcome to our series that has our permanent presenter, Mr. Mohammad Ali Toosy, and today's expert, Dr. Morphis Tsalikidis. We've got 1 hour to look at how risk management is important to business success and sustainability, and what we will be doing or what we can do to map and then secure our businesses, our projects from risk. So with that in context, I also would like to welcome everybody to the webinar. We have over 40 registrations, and I hope people will continue to join in as we go. We're also going live on Facebook. And so I'd like to recommend that if you've got any questions or comments, or if you have any thoughts that you wish to share with the group or ask from our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A as well as the chat box that appears in front of you. If you wish to make a lengthier comment or share a link or add more information, please do so in the chat box, and we'll try our best to address it during the Q&A session. So with that, allow me to welcome our two presenters for today from Toosy Advisory Services and the CEO, Mr. Mohammad Ali Toosy. Mr. Mohammad Ali Toosy is a master black belt in Six Sigma, and he's had numerous assignments working with industry, with government, with the UN system, with NGOs, trying to optimize efficiencies in their organizations. And he's worked across a number of sectors, from defense and telecommunications to education and manufacturing, fast-moving commercial goods. So we'd like to, and he's also a key member of our Six Sigma Academy team. So welcome, Mohammad Ali Toosy, to the webinar.
Thank you.
Dr. Morphis, I do apologize, Morphis. My European pronunciations are terrible, but I'm sure you can repay the compliment with your Asian pronunciations.
Oh, sure, yeah. Don't worry, don't worry.
Morphis Tsalikidis, and Morphis, of course, is Chief Executive of Morphis Consulting. Morphis Consulting works with optimization of the manufacturing industry, the IT industry. Morphis has a lot of experience working with actual optimizing systems in Europe, and now lives in Spain, where he works with a number of counterparts, and also, I presume, teaches on a number of courses at a number of universities. So welcome to the webinar, gentlemen. The standard structure of our webinars is that we let our panelists unpack the subject, and we take a relatively superficial view in the beginning, but then we respond to questions that are more sort of deep. And the whole idea is for us to introduce to you the Six Sigma Academy at the Asian Institute of Technology, and see whether you would like to join one of our many seminars, courses, certificate programs that are continuously on offer. And as we move into the webinar, I'd like to also punctuate this by again reminding everybody that, not that anybody needs reminding, of the post-COVID scenario. Most of us realized since February, really, that a lot of the assumptions that we worked on, a lot of the certainties we thought existed in our business or in our lives are no longer true. There's a whole new way now of actually anticipating things. Trends don't seem to work, projections are not working, risk assessments are now being reconfigured and completely redone. So we thought this was a particularly important time for us to revisit the idea of risk management and then superimpose it on the Six Sigma tools, the Lean Six Sigma tools that are now available, that we can now reuse and redeploy to maybe realigning some of our risk perceptions, finding out how we can use some of the Lean Six Sigma methodologies, frameworks, and tools to actually, with relatively greater sure-footedness, approach what is now being called the new normal, the post-COVID phase of business and life in general. So with that in context, allow me to first invite Mr. Toosy to just unpack the idea of risk management, and then seamlessly move on to an overview from Dr. Morphis into appreciating what we would like our viewers to understand about what is risk management and how important it is to understand risk management in this particular high-risk environment. Mr. Toosy.
Yes, risk. It's important to understand that risk and risk management. Risk is basically a probability of occurrence of any event which might have a negative or positive impact on expected results. What we need to do is we need to mitigate the probability or the impact of negative events while taking risks for positive outcomes. So that's in a nutshell, that's basically what risk is and what we need to do, and we need to manage it. And we need to manage it for our benefit in such a way that the negative aspects whichever comes, are minimized as much as possible. Morphis, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, well, sorry, Dr. Faiz?
Yes, please go ahead. I was just going to say we'd move seamlessly from
Okay.
Ali to yourself. Of course, he's talked about identifying, assessing, and then controlling threats to an organization's existence or capital. So anything that you want to add, perhaps a more detailed, more nuanced definition of how you perceive risk. And then I could move on to perhaps some more specific examples from both of you, gentlemen.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thanks for the introduction of risk. And risk is a funny concept, actually, because I've been blessed to work both with manufacturing setup and office setup, service environment. And even the same country you are, different industries, you see people have a different kind of appreciation of risk. You find yourself in manufacturing, everything is about protecting health and safety and the avoidance of accident. You go to an office setting, as the engineers sometimes like to joke, and they say the only thing you worry is about a paper cut because it's a much more safe environment, so you tend to underestimate the risk. And as you mentioned about COVID, very, very well at the beginning, linking to that, risk is very funny. We think about that only when bad things happen. Quite often, we don't take the preventive actions to think ahead and say, if things go wrong, what we are going to do. And in that part, it's very fascinating for people to look into the research done about the cognitive bias and the way people think and perceive the risk. And when you start looking into the psychology, it's very interesting to find out that elements like we tend to overestimate how good we are when the risk happens. We go, don't worry, if things go wrong, we'll do X, Y, Z. And we underestimate the effort that we need to put, we underestimate the impact. And when they look into the way we assess the risk ourselves, and this is quite important to have a structured way of organizing yourself. When you look how we think, people say we overestimate rare events because they've been discussed. If something rare happens, it's on the news, it's on the Facebook, social media, you talk with your friends. So then when later you try to estimate the probability, you overestimate it. And the counter effect is risks that happen day to day, you underestimate them. Which means you have what I call the Bermuda Triangle. You overestimate your capability to deal with the risks, you overestimate the rare ones, and you underestimate the common ones, which is a recipe for disaster, basically. and this is what is one of the reasons it's a source of trouble for organizations, let's say.
Yeah, and I mean, some common things is talking about risk management a bit more detail is that now we are in the digital world, and now we're going 5G and possibly 6G, the next after 5G. Now that the Internet of Things are coming in, the risk, because all the different devices would be talking to each other, of being hacked needs to be assessed and actually understood. And similarly, I mean, well, I'm not actually currently working in defense, but defense organizations need to actually assess, with all this Internet of Things and all these new hacking tools, what I call toys they have, are they even effective? Because if someone hacks and you can't use your toy, or you can't use your, I think, plane, everything goes bust. So the risk of that actually needs to be mitigated. So that's, I mean, a few years ago, a drone was actually brought down. Iran brought down an American drone. That was through hacking. That risk wasn't actually thought of. Sometimes there's a small risk. Sometimes there's a small risk of which you think is small, but because of that risk, when it occurs, your whole satellite can just go bust. And similarly, because of not assessing, and sometimes there's a very small window to react. So if you've not already had the preventive mechanisms within reasonable bounds, And that's what I actually always say, within reasonable bounds, because there's always going to be a probability of anything to happen, but you can't actually close the doors and make everything so difficult that nothing actually ever happens. So there needs to be a balance too. So,
great example of how, I mean, who would have really thought that risk would involve things that are intangible to our eyes most of the time, are not mapped into business plans or mapped into HR plans and, financial projections. Risk can arise from so many different, completely unknown sides. So I guess one of the things we need to, there's an old saying which says that the eyes do not see what the mind does not know. So risk, to my mind, as somebody who is not an expert, to my mind, risk is basically finding out what's there, finding out more and more, identifying risk and then assessing them. So unless we can identify them, it's difficult to assess them and then try to control.
yes.
So I'd like to get your perspectives now on how do you map these risks? I mean, there are more traditional, financial or legal liability issues, etc., which most people are aware of and would posit into their thinking. But there are tools, right? So maybe, Dr. Morphis, you might want to just quickly tell us what are the diagnostics and what are some of the identification tools that you use. And then I'd take the same question again seamlessly to Mr. Toosy, where I'd like to ask how Six Sigma can then add to that, capability among organizations to identify and diagnose risk.
Well, it's a very good point, because as you correctly said, and I like the analogy with the eyes and the mind, because we try to perceive risk with the familiar, but the new technology and evolution is the unfamiliar. So it's very difficult for the brain to conceive this kind of risks. I would say there are two important elements into how you organize your self-assess. One's the human element and one's the tool element. The human element is always preferred to bring an outsider in, what they say, a fresh pair of eyes, or people with a different kind of background, because they will see the environment differently than what you see yourself. Because you are used, if you go in a factory, for example, or in an office, you are used to that factory as an employee of that office. So certain things you take them for granted, or you don't notice them. There are some tests that you can miss something, for example, if you do it. So bringing someone from an outsider that asks questions, that sees this with the eyes of a child and asks many and why this is there and why and what will happen with that, is a big mental booster and creative booster that can help you look things a bit differently. So infusing with the outside perspective is quite critical in this kind of situation, to widen your perspective. That's one thing. And then tool-wise, I think there is a plethora of tools available, not only risk-related tools, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Toosy will talk later about FMEA, FA mode, that is one big one in the Lean Six Sigma community, but then, and risk management community, you can take tools that you were using, let's say, for efficiency, like the spaghetti diagram, where it was used in the past to check the route of people in the premises, and you were trying to optimize the risk, to optimize the route, to optimize the efficiency. Now, you think in terms of COVID, route is quite important, because if you have one infected, let's say, employee, you want to track where they have been. You want to know with whom they interact. You want to know which places they visit more often. So then an efficiency tool, just taking the lens out of efficiency and put the lens of risk, you can use it differently. And it can help you identify hotspots. So you can have this kind of a different look of traditional tools and bring them to the new context. And you can get a lot of value out of it.
Yes, sure. That's exactly why we also need to actually have our creative hats on when we're using tools. And one of the things which we actually teach and we actually advocate is that you need to use tools which are relevant instead of actually just using tool for the sake of tool. And because the spaghetti diagram, which you just mentioned, identifies the normal route of movement of people, or movement of things, you would automatically know which points are intersecting. And when you know which points are intersecting, you can actually, and you have identified that these are the intersecting points. So you could actually have more targeted efforts to prevent any, I would say, infection because of COVID at those intersection points. Maybe actually have more sanitizers, or maybe have a more mandatory to actually wear masks at that particular point, because you don't need to actually put masks all the time. When you're sitting alone in a room, you don't need to do that. But when you're intersecting, that's the time when you need to do it.
And actually it has consequences that have not been yet understood. For example, if we talk about convenience stores, okay, how they have been organized until now, the placing of the material on the store is such that they want to maximize your time in the shop, to move around, because the more you move around and you look, the more you buy things. Now, when you try to optimize route, you want to be as less time as possible in the office, because now there are some guidelines in countries that says if this is your square meter, you have only 10 people in. So before another customer goes in, another must go out. So you need to rearrange your store, being more customer-centric to optimize the route of the customer. And then the question comes, when COVID goes away or things change, can you go back to the old model of working? I don't think customers will appreciate it. So the consequences of this is not just about risk. Some organizations will have to think fundamentally different how they interact with the customer and how they build the business around the customer experience and what the customer wants to do. It has many, many, many avenues.
Well, this is where I'd like to kind of scrape through a little deeper and say, shall we talk about any specific tools that, say, in your Lean Six Sigma approaches you prefer, and then maybe just a little introduction to that, so that people can then try to grasp how we actually diagnose risk. I mean, are there any toolkits? Are there any checklists? Are there any interactive techniques? Maybe a few examples would be useful here. And then we can maybe launch into how Six Sigma allows us to optimize these tools to get to the identification of risk.
I think Ali can talk about FMEA, and then I can be practical examples. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so I would actually like to start with a quote from Albert Einstein. He said that if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So sometimes we need to go into the problem and understand the problem in detail and then come up with solutions. So that's what all risk management is. It is understanding the risks. And once you understand the risk properly from all the dimensions, you would then be able to come up with solutions. And another thing which you need to do is you need to actually take out the action biases. Because if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's simple. So you need to actually take that action bias out. And there is really interesting thing, which is FMEA, which is primarily, it is to identify risks, its impacts, and it gives you a way to mitigate it and gives you a way to have actions on that.
FMEA is failure,
modes and effects analysis. Yeah.
And effects analysis.
And effects analysis.
Yes.
Let's give an example. Let's give a practical example. Okay. So, and this is one of my favorite tools in essence, and we can use it inside Six Sigma, outside Six Sigma, inside project, outside project. You don't need to box it. Okay. So imagine you are a hotel business. I think tourism is very important in Thailand. Okay. And I'm talking some hotels actually now in Spain. So FMEA, as Ali said, it helps you assess what can go wrong. So you have a process that says a customer comes in, a guest comes in. And as part of the process that you assume, or you hope, that the guest is going to use the hand sanitizer, the gel that you have. So having this kind of step in your process that says we use the disinfectant, you start asking yourself, first question, what can go wrong? Okay, what can go wrong when someone is trying to use a disinfectant bottle? And then you think all the possible things that can go wrong, like there is no gel, it ran out of gel. Then it could be the gel is inside, but the machine is broken and the gel will not come out. Or the customer, the guest will pass, see the bottle, or does not see the bottle, and they don't sanitize their hands. So you go through that's why it's important to have the right people around the table, what I was saying in the beginning, the right people around the table, subject matter experts, people with broad eyesight and knowledge, and you list all your potential effects, failure modes. And then for each failure mode, you try to understand why this is happening, for example. So if you tell me there is no gel in the hand sanitizer, it could be because nobody saw it, that it was empty. So then the question is, what kind of alert system I have? Or I saw it, but the storage area, I ran out, I need to order. So then you start thinking about ordering from suppliers and how you check your stock. Or you might say, we saw it, we have gel, but the person got sidetracked. So you start listing the causes and you start assessing the impact of those kind of failures. And this tool takes you to a structured approach that basically says that all potential failures I can identify. These are all the causes behind them. These are the effects that I have. And then the funny part starts, the fun part, what you mentioned before, how you rank them, how you're assessing them. So you go there and using some tables that can be industry specific or not, you start assessing severity. Give you an idea, in manufacturing, for example, severity of 10 means something happened in the factory that can put in danger the health, the safety, the life of the operator, and there is no alarm for this failure. This is number 10 in terms of severity. So you rank in terms of severity, you rank in terms of ability to detect, because if you can detect, you can prevent, and then you rank based on frequency. And all these assessments give the favorite number that maybe Ali was talking about, the risk priority number, and you try to prioritize yourself and say which are the most critical things to tackle, because you want to tackle the elephant, not the mosquito. Okay, you want to tackle the big things and to use your time, value add for time, to use your time to address the most important things.
Yes, it's all about severity, detectability, and occurrence. And it's all about giving it a number, and it's all about making sure that you actually first compute everything thoughtfully, and then after computing everything thoughtfully, you go after the big risks instead of actually going to the small risks, which are insignificant and wasting your resources on things which are not as severe or as not as risky as the others are.
So what I hear is that, I mean, there is a lot of homework to be done, right? There's a lot of perspectives to be considered. There's a lot of information to be gathered. And there's a lot of, as you say, prioritization to be done, because not every risk has the same lethality to it, the same disruptive element to it, or the same existential elements, that impact businesses or processes, etc. So I think that's also important to understand. And how you describe it is fascinating, because it appears to me that the average business manager, or the average, or even above average, the untrained business manager requires a really good grasp of risk assessment, risk management, the process of risk management, before they can actually take on decision-making responsibility seriously. So I think that's a lesson that there are tools, there are mechanisms, there are methods that managers need to really fine-tune and learn well to be able to take that decision-making or problem-solving role, right? So what are some of the things, for instance, you talked about prioritizing risks, Mr. Toosy. There's a method that you use? You've gathered all this information, you've listed up all the various risks to the various elements of your business process, to your customer interface, to your human resource mapping, your financial systems, etc., etc. So there must be a lot of information, a lot of data coming in. How do you actually then slice through it and pick up or give appropriate priority or value to various risk elements that you gather? So let's talk a little bit about how you do prioritization, and then maybe carry on straight into Dr. Morphis's comments as well, and then we can get on and try to understand where we are taking this.
First of all, what we need to do is, I mean, just like we usually say that success is in simplicity. So we have to make sure that we have thought through every possible thing systematically, and then put that information in, let's say, one page, which is visible, in which there is a meaning to whatever we're doing. Instead of actually having it too detailed, make it very simple, small bits and pieces, so that a lot of thought has gone behind it, but it's going to be presented and seen in a way which is in one page or one diagram or one thing like that, so that you can see the snapshot. Another thing which is very important for FMEA especially is that if you try to do this alone, you would most probably lose the point. It has to be done. It has to be done as a combined effort. And one of the most biggest mistakes is that people try to do it with a few people. And when we are talking about risks, and we're talking about risk priorities, and we're talking about all these things, we need to have input from multiple people, which means that the top management needs to sponsor this activity. And they need to realize, the top management needs to realize how important this is. Maybe actually even sit in one FMEA workshop or computation, so that people, the leadership displays that they are interested, and make sure that it's not the responsibility of the person who is just using the tool. It is the responsibility of everyone to bring in their ideas. Otherwise, what happens is that the essence of the tool is lost, because it's not the tool which works. It's the people behind the tool who work with that specific tool effectively, which matters more. So that
very, very well said. I think most people think that just acquiring or getting their hands on a particular instrument or tool will solve the problem. But I think that's where your academy comes in, right?
Yes.
You need to be able to understand the tool before that understanding can be converted into solving problems, right? Is that correct, Dr. Morphis?
Yeah, correct. That's quite nice. And there's another dimension that we need to take into consideration is the maturity of the environment. Okay, because if I go to a nuclear plant, if I go to automotive, if I go to pharmaceutical, I'm pretty sure they are quite strong in risk and they have their scales, they have their assessments, they have the data to do the assessments, they have the accuracy of the data to do the assessments. So in this kind of environments, thinking about risk can be quite straightforward, but the majority of the companies do not belong into this. The majority of the companies and the people are what you would call in non-mature risk assessment environment, if I'm allowed to say so. So in that environment, what is quite critical, I will pick one word that was said before, was simplicity, okay? Because the worst thing you can do is to go to a group of people that start doing about risk and assessment, throw them a lot of information in, and then give them a scale from 1 to 10 and tell them, rank them. And then you can spend 3 hours debating what is a 4 and what is a 5, what is a 2 and what is a 3. And I don't understand this definition. So, and I don't understand this, and we don't have the data for that. So if you go to non-mature environments, I advise people to be simple and tell them, for severity or for recurrence, you start something simple and say severity, low, medium, high. Or if it is too complicated for you, go low, medium, high. And once you do this qualitative assessment, then you can assign numbers. Let's say 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. or 159. Keep it simple, because the importance of the discussion, and the importance is, two things are important. One, in the company to be consistent. You cannot have one department doing risk assessments differently than the other. So you need to have consistency across the organization. And the second thing is to have in mind is not so much, we talk about numbers, calculations, it's not so much the absolute number you will get, 250, 95. What it is, if you understand the logic, you just need a mechanism to rank the relative importance of each one. So it's only the relative importance that matters. And that's why I say you can make it qualitative if numbers are too complicated for you. So the more young you are in this kind of field, the more baby steps you need to apply. If someone asks me to train like Usain Bolt, that doesn't run anymore 100 to 100 meters, I cannot do the training regime ever. So if I want to run faster, I need to have some baby steps, step by step, to build my maturity and capability before I go to more advanced setup.
Right. But what's clearly coming out here is that this is quite a defined, systematic approach to risk assessment. Right? And I'd like to return to our idea, our thought in the initial parts of the webinar was to use a real life example, for instance, on how we use the Lean Six Sigma approaches, the tools that you gentlemen teach other people in actually predicting something really, really drastic. Basic risk assessment, of course, most trends can be predicted and so on. But let's take the example of your standard risk management model, which I believe is how you start to define it, and then you create measurements, and then you decide on what improvements or preparations are required, and then you basically decide on how to control risk from ever happening or ever impacting you. That we understood from. So it's a very systematic way, it's a very structured way, it's a very considered way of approaching risk. But then shall we take the example of, say, the COVID pandemic? As late as January, it had been a month into the whole news breaking out of of people being affected. It took us like almost a month and a half to react. And there are certain systems even today which haven't really picked up on the right kind of responses. So my question is, what could we have done in predicting a pandemic of this enormous scale using some of your, say, Six Sigma tools? So imagine yourself, as you mentioned, a hotel or a hospitality industry operator, a transportation operator, an educational institution, and so on. So maybe shall we take one example from one of these that you've already referred to, apply the COVID threat to it, and see what we might have done or what we might do now even for predicting a resurgence or a relapse of some of this. So a quick example, perhaps from your side, using more concrete examples from our real life would be good for our participants.
I would like to actually initiate and then leave it to Morphis to discuss in detail.
You guys have a great tandem act.
This FMEA and this tool is not supposed to be just a one-time thing. You're not supposed to just do it and then keep it in the drawer. If this tool is kept and revisited regularly, and especially whenever you have found out that something different has happened and you reassess things based on that, the problems which we would have faced we would not have faced in the same way, because we would have reassessed very fast. The problems which we had in general are that we kept on waiting instead of having a tool and then keeping it as a live document to find out.
Yeah, but this is at the generic level, right, Mr. Toosy?
Yeah.
The thing is, we are trying to see, we didn't know there was a coronavirus strain ready to break out and affect, hundreds of thousands of people. But we did hear about some calculations or some scenario planning or some scenarios that were predicting a major epidemic in the world or whatever. And so there must have been some people out there who were trying to imagine what would happen if a major epidemic broke out of one
Pandemic, yeah.
and converted itself into a global pandemic. So I know that we've read about those, but I'd like us to revert to maybe some concrete examples of how, in the face of absolutely no knowledge or no even assumptions of where an epidemic might be brewing, what can we do using our Lean Six Sigma tools and our training and our learning in securing our environment or our business, or at least our immediate vicinity of work, from such completely unforeseen events?
Yeah, this is a very good question and a very tough one.
This boggles the mind. I mean, how could you even imagine these things?
Well, and I was involved in a discussion with some people 3 days ago when we were debating why we are missing this, and is it a tool, is it not a tool? Now, I like to take a step back a little bit, because I think the tools, if we go tool by tool, we can find how the tools properly used can help you forecast and foresee. Okay, and we can discuss about specific workshops or creative workshops or open mind. We can build a kind of workshop that helps you think out of the box or think extreme scenarios, etc. The problem, however, there's a fundamental problem before it goes to the tool, is there's a culture issue here and a mindset issue. And what I want to say about that? Let's go before we heard about some people getting sick in China, okay? Although there were many articles published that they were foreseeing the possibility of a pandemic. People found articles published in journals, medical journals in 2007, talking about this kind of events. I want to go a bit to another big event that happened some years ago, an impact supply chain, for example, the Fukushima incident, where they had the earthquake in Japan, they had the tsunami, they had the event, and this had a huge impact on supply chain, because many things that they were built in Japan and shipped to other places in the world, they were not shipped. And a lot of industries were facing problems in the supply chain to get the things they needed in order to produce parts or offer services. Now, if you start with that example, someone could have said, this is an event, we don't know how often this happens, but we can see the effect. The effect was a region in Asia, in that part of the world, could not produce things, and as a result, had an impact in the rest of them. And then the question was that how many companies, how many people went through this kind of mental exercise and say, maybe I cannot foresee the pandemic, maybe I cannot foresee, but I can foresee and say events can happen. Can be political events, can be health events, can be economic events, that they can significantly disrupt my supply chain for 1, 2, 3, 4 months. Okay? How do I deal with that scenario? And the fascinating thing is that I don't think companies did that exercise, and it's a mindset thing. Maybe we are configured to try to avoid painful thoughts. Psychologists have a lot to say about this thing. But how many people went through this exercise to say, no matter the reason, how do we deal when the factories cannot work for 2 or 3 months? And I think the majority did not do this kind of exercise. And that's why there is a step back to do, to say culturally, how do we deal with risks? And culturally, I think that the culture is a big element, because, correct me, no, my apologies for the stereotype, but I think it's true that the Western culture is more short-term oriented, the Eastern culture is more long-term oriented. So maybe sometimes it's not so much whether I have the right tools in place. It is a question, am I mentally prepared, open to consider these scenarios and act? Because for tools, we can listen. You can do the process maps, you can do root cause analysis,
cultural insights about different countries.
Yeah.
And based on those cultural insights, it's really interesting when you actually see how he has assessed nearly every country and come up with his values.
Yeah. So then you start with the consciousness first, the awareness, the mindsets, the way of acting and behaving and dealing with risk. And when you open that door, that sometimes is very shut and locked, then you can introduce the tools, and then you can go through the structured approach of step one, I check my process. Step two, I look at history, past cases, historical data, I do cause and effect. And then it does not maybe so much matter itself sometimes, the cause. But when you see the impact and the effect, then you can think about mitigation actions and how you react.
So, I mean, what I've been able to understand from this conversation is that we have to be able to invest time, effort, commitment, and buy-in at the organizational level to be able to prepare ourselves for risk. You can't just wait until the last moment at the edge of the precipice. You say, oops, we need to do a risk assessment. So what I've heard you gentlemen say is that there are tools, there are bodies of knowledge. You mentioned Hofstede. There are bodies of knowledge. There are enormous layers of research from which we know how certain types of risks can be mapped and how certain kinds of tools fit certain kinds of cultural or organizational dimensions, which are then useful for us to create that predictability in our risk assessments. And to me, this is a fascinating field. And I don't think anybody on their own is able to just Google through a few things or whatever and become aware and prepared for managing risk. So to me, this webinar is, if you ask me if I were a participant, I'd really want to go out and find out more. So could you, I mean, it's now 2:45 and we're getting into our question answer session time. Would you very quickly share with us some of the programs that the Academy, the Six Sigma Academy runs, so that if there is a risk, interest in risk management, learning Six Sigma approaches to risk management, what would they be, and when can we expect those to be offered to our interested participants?
Well, we have at the moment, we have our Lean Six Sigma Green Belt course, and we have the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt course already offered. The offering is already on the website. One is the first, we have one in August, and then a Black Belt in September.
Right.
So, and then subsequently we have a schedule over there. We are looking forward to bringing in some new courses. And while we're developing it, we'll have the Master Black Belt, which is the highest skill set level. We're thinking of that. We're planning of that. We maybe would have something called soft skills for Lean Six Sigma, stuff like that. And maybe we would have, I mean, we're thinking at the moment of having it in a variety of such a thing that we have multiple people also delivering it. And we have different aspects. One thing which we have already in our Lean Six Sigma Academy is that we have change management part of the essential offering is change management, and part of the essential curriculum is also change management. And we are trying to focus on the practicality of things, and the theory, practicality, and the ability to work and actually use it. That's what we are focusing on.
Excellent. So there is a whole step ladder of trainings, events that we can look forward to, and one of them is the Green Belt program.
Yes.
Coming in quickly enough, and then there's a cascade of very interesting events. So please do share the web link or the link in the chat box as we speak, so that people, if they want to send queries or find out a little bit more about how we are gearing up for this post-COVID world through Lean Six Sigma capability building, people can find out. We have some questions here too, but before I take the question from Mr. Faisal, I'd like to see if Dr. Morphis has any quick comments to conclude on what our offerings will be and how we are preparing people for post-COVID risk, overcoming risk?
Well, I like to say that, when someone is hungry and is asking for food, the food will be served. The courses that were mentioned are a good starting point. When we talked about structure, we talked about two things. We talked about the structure, the tools and methodology, and we talked about the cultural element. And a lot of the programs that already were put in place through the Lean Six Sigma Academy answer very well the question: can you teach me how to use the tools? Can you teach me what tools I can use to analyze my processes? What tools we can use in order to see what's happening in the organization? And then, depending the interest and the demand, what will be interesting and what we will discuss going forward. And it was a thought process that involved listening to you, Dr. Faiz, is maybe we can think about some master classes and say, for example, you did your Lean Six Sigma training at this level. You achieved this. Now let's do a masterclass specific thematic on risk. Let's do a masterclass specifically on topic X. And then we can help people take a concept that, let's be honest, in training, most often it's a generic concept that you teach because you have people from different backgrounds. And then you have a specific masterclass that says, how can I take now this concept into my industry, into a hospital, into a hotel, into a restaurant, into a bank or financial services. And then you can help people a little bit more appreciate. And I like a lot the Toyota philosophy on that, saying that, the training is only the start. The training gives you awareness, because unless you go and you practice and you have a coach to help you while you practice, then the knowledge can be lost after X, Y months. So if I see it as a learning development ecosystem for your students and people who are interested in joining the Lean Six Sigma Academy, I would say we will need to find a way to complement the very good courses built around Lean Six Sigma with some master classes to give context and maybe some coaching, some follow-up in real life.
That's great. So I'm looking forward to the master classes. Shall we move to the question that we have in front of me here from Mr. Faisal? It says that in a way we are saying that the whole world has a mindset and culture, which basically has failed, really, us. And so we were not able to preempt the COVID, he's saying. So do we need a major reset in our perception of risk, in how we understand risk, so that the majority of the population who was left, he uses the word wrong-footed, can actually be more secure? So what could we have done? What are the things that, from the cultural or from the mindset perspectives, that you think we need to work on, so that this sense of false complacency or security that relying on trends and assumptions created for us is not repeated, and we might be then ending up with another unanticipated cataclysmic event? So to make, maybe I need to reframe this or tighten the question. Are there any cultural or mindset issues we need to address to perhaps be prepared better for a future catastrophe?
Respect for people. Respect for people is one of the core principles of Lean. And wherever respect for people is going to be, and wherever respect for people has been displayed, the outcome has been relatively better in the way COVID has been dealt with. That's my take on it. And that's a key thing of Lean. Morphis, would you actually like to?
Well, actually, I would like to start with an emphatic yes, to say, yes, we have an issue. And I will raise my hand to say, I was one of the people at the beginning that underestimated the risk. When it appeared on the news early January, February, I was saying, hey, what's happening over there in that part of the world? I can't believe it. And then you go, wow, this is my pocket, this is my neighborhood, he came here. So underestimating maybe what happened is fine, but the cultural element that is raised by our participant, by our attendee, can be seen in how then people react. Because for me, it's shocking. Once you understood, you grasp what is happening, you still have A lot of people debating whether it is your right or not to wear a mask, whether the COVID is real or not. So when you saw how people reacted to this pandemic, not just forecast it or understand it, reacted once it came and knocked your door and people start to die in your city, how people reacted to that, it was shocking for me. A big part of the population still resisting, still not accepting the risk and the actions that need to be taken. So I would say, yes, there is a big mindset. Yes, there is a cultural element. And the best way to address these things, because I talked with some doctors and psychologists in Spain, as you know, Spain was heavily impacted. What they told me is, unless yourself or someone very close experiences that, you don't believe it. So the best thing, take people to a hospital to see what's happening there. I'm taking another example of the COVID pandemic. So if you want to influence the behavior, the mindset, you don't influence it logically, you influence it emotionally. So, and we don't tell people to get sick, but I would tell people to visit the hospital and see what is happening. And then this maybe will change the perception of risk, and then it will change the behavior. Emotion is the key part in this equation.
Emotion.
We have another question from Joy Abandano. What kind of Lean Six Sigma tools could help us secure our community or businesses? I assume the context is, again, unforeseen major events.
What tools? Ali, do you want to list all half the tools that
Well, there are a lot of actually. Do you want to, or should I?
For the question to be answered adequately, would it be enough?
Okay. There are a lot of tools. Spaghetti diagram and failure mode effect analysis is something which we talked about. Pokayoka is a tool. CPOC diagram is a tool. Visual management is a tool. Control charts. Fishbone diagram. Measurement system analysis. 5 whys.
We can quickly, if you guys are so inclined, type it into the chat box so everybody can get a sense and they can start Googling their heart's content. And then they maybe will be interested in joining your program to find out how those tools are actually useful for their particular work. So please do take a moment, both our experts, to just do a quick laundry list of a couple of tools that you might find useful. It's now 2:55, and we don't have a lot of questions, but we do have a couple of comments from our various participants saying that they appreciate some of the examples you've given and the way you've covered this. There is also a request for link, which I will provide soon, and thank you. We've got those messages. So I'm also typing in our link for the program, and so hopefully soon we'll be able to start receiving queries, and we'll forward them to both you gentlemen. In the 4 minutes that we have, I think personally, I found that the topic was fascinating. It's also very engaging. And please forgive me for saying this, but I want to learn more about Lean Six Sigma and risk management. So will you guys be available for another webinar sometime soon, so that then we can maybe get more people to ask more specific questions, and maybe we prepare a kind of a slideshow for everybody. I thought this was a lead up kind of a webinar, but personally, I feel this is an area that we don't advert to as frequently or as deeply as we should. So if you guys are interested, maybe we should announce another one soon with a little bit more detail, a little bit more structure. What do you say to that, guys?
We will be happy to support that.
You're busy. Ask you. Great. So then, on behalf of the Six Sigma Academy at the Asian Institute of Technology, we're very grateful to our two panelists, Mr. Toosy and Dr. Morphis, to make time available to us. And I'm very grateful for all of you for making time. And as we leave, I'd like to also thank the team here at AIT Extension, that makes it possible for us to run all these webinars in practically every time zone, and reach out to people with great speakers and great ideas like this. So thank you all for coming, and everybody on Facebook Live as well that's logged in. We're grateful for you, for your presence. And so until the next time, until the next Six Sigma series workshop, it's have a great day, and it's goodbye from us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you.
Thank you.